Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight and welcome you to the third CAP event of the academic year. My name's Jennifer Algeretti. I'm the program coordinator in the Student Services Office. We've invited a special guest tonight to come and introduce our speaker. In 2009, Ty Callahan was appointed Academic Director of Undergraduate Programs. In addition to this role, Ty is also an Associate Professor in the Finance and Business Economics Department. Please help me in welcoming Ty Callahan.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you all for coming. I'm here really to introduce our speaker, Chris Lischewski. And I got a little Polish pronunciation lesson right before coming up here, so I hope I did okay with that. Chris is president and CEO of Bumble Foods. He's held this position since 1999. And under his leadership, Bumblebee has become the largest packaged seafood, branded seafood company in North America. So basically, Chris sells a lot of tuna. Before entering the food industry, Mr. Lischewski worked as a consultant for A.T. Kearney. He's served a variety of international clients working in Europe. He assisted the opening of A.T. Kearney's first Asian office in Singapore. But after leaving consulting, he joined H.J. Heinz, and there he helped turn around Starkist seafood business, the other big tuna seller. So he held positions as the VP of Procurement and Business Development, the Group VP of Global Procurement and Operations, and I think I read somewhere that at that time you oversaw the largest fleet of fishing vessels in the world. And he was Managing Director of Heinz European Seafood. In 1999, as I said, he joined Bumblebee, and at Bumblebee, he's integrated several seafood acquisitions and has been involved in multiple moves between private equity and public ownership. Not surprisingly, Chris is recognized for his strength in business restructuring and developing successful business strategy. He also has a well-earned reputation for achieving low-cost operations and profitable market growth. Chris and Bumblebee also are strong leaders in promoting sustainable practices. The company is a founding member of the International Seafood Sustainability Foundation, which focuses on sustainability practices for maintaining worldwide fisheries. And now the important part, Mr. Lischewski received a BS in Finance and Accounting and an MBA in International Finance from the Marshall School of Business. So it's our pleasure to welcome him, and we look forward to your talk.
All right, half of my speech is over. Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I think, clearly the professionalism at USC has increased over time. I think during my tenure here in the early 80s, we would have all probably been over at the 9-0 by now. So I'm going to kind of take you through. The heading of my presentation I actually stole from an article I pulled out of The Economist called The Hard Slog Ahead. And I think that's something a lot of you are going to face probably coming out of school during one of the most difficult times of any generation. There we go. I'm going to start with a little bit of personal background. Again, I got my BS in finance in '82, and prior to that, I grew up over in Europe for most of my youth. My dad was in the Air Force, and I think part of that kind of gave me an advantage in today's world in that we moved every 3 years. And, international for me was something that was pretty easy because we grew up doing it. I graduated from high school in Las Vegas in '78 and had a choice to make at that point. Did I go to USC or did I go to Tulane in New Orleans? Well, drinking age was 18 in New Orleans at that time, so I went to Tulane. But after 2 years there, it really became pretty clear that the South was very different than the West Coast, and it wasn't a place I wanted to end up. So I did transfer back to USC as a junior, completed my degree in '82. At that time, it was also one of these things. The market back in the early '80s wasn't that great. And I had two offers. One was in Los Angeles, the other in Bakersfield, California. One paid $18,000, one paid $24,000. Which one should I take? LA and $18,000. So it was, clearly something that to be able to live in Manhattan Beach at that age was much more desirable. My work experience has really covered a lot of different experiences. As I mentioned, I worked here in LA coming out of college and took a job as a cost accountant. And again, I think I didn't want to be a cost accountant. I wanted to be a financial analyst. I wanted to work for IBM. Well, those jobs weren't there. At least I wasn't qualified for them, or I wasn't selected. And so again, I took a job as a cost accountant. It was a great job. It took me 3 months to figure out my job. After that, it took me 2 days a week. And it allowed me to really expand and start doing a lot of other things within the company. And clearly from there I reached out, and at that point in the 80s, aerospace was very strong. And I joined a little company called TRW down in Redondo Beach, about 10 minutes from where I lived. And I got some real good exposure in the financial areas, both in commercial finance at that point, and then moved into defense. Did that for a few years and decided to pursue my MBA here at Marshall at the evening program, and got a degree in international finance back in '86. And in '86, when you came out, there was really two directions to go coming out of an MBA. It was either investment banking, which meant moving to New York, or management consulting. I chose management consulting, and I got to tell you, as you all advance in your careers, if that's an opportunity you have when you're young, it's worth taking. It's a brutal lifestyle. I don't think I was home but for potentially 2 or 3 weekends a month. You're basically working with clients. Your clients' engagements last 3 to 4 months, which is a really steep learning curve. But I'll tell you what, in 8 years I spent in consulting, I felt I got 25 years worth of experience because you have so much learning that you're doing to come up to speed. I think the other thing that really helped me with management consulting is confidence in myself. I came out of college and my career aspiration was to be a vice president. I didn't know where. I just wanted to be a vice president. That was kind of as far as I could look. And yet, in management consulting, I was able to work with executive teams, CEOs of a lot of companies. And, I realized a lot of these guys really aren't that good. And it's, it really, when you think about it, and I think management has changed somewhat over time, but if you go back to that period of time, quite often, if you were the CEO, well, you didn't want to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you that might make you look bad, so you surrounded yourself with people that are just one step below you. Well, now you retire and you promote one of those guys, and what does he do? Well, he promotes people that are just a little bit below him. And you go through 4 or 5 generations of management, what do you have leading U.S. companies? Well, hell, GM was one of my clients, enough said. You learn that there's not necessarily, that CEOs don't necessarily deserve the respect that they get. And it gave me a lot of confidence in my management abilities to move on. From there, I joined a client, and I'll talk about these in a little bit more detail. I joined Starkist, which was a turnaround project. Starkist was one of my clients. I was living in Singapore at the time. And Starkist was owned by Heinz, and the 2 biggest competitors at that time, Bumble was acquired by a group out of Thailand, and Chicken of the Sea by a group out of Indonesia. And immediately, all the rules changed. You went from 3 U.S. corporations that had an earnings per share mentality to 2 major Chinese-run family businesses that dealt with cash flow, and a whole different management practice came to the market. And from there, I'll talk about how I moved into Bumblebee. The first executive position with Starkist was rewarding, and again, a big reason that I took the job at Starkist was, one, I loved the challenge of a turnaround, but the reality and the frustration that ultimately overcame me in consulting is you never get to do. You get to advise. And you'd come up with these great programs, and invariably the client would never execute. So it got really frustrating. And so going back into a world of real business where you could actually tackle problems and make change is something that I wanted to do that I thought would be very rewarding. And Starkist was that kind of operation. It was a company that was clearly the #1 brand of tuna in the U.S. at the time, but was actually, after 2 years of attack from the Asian competitors, was losing money. Horrible management team, which again, I was part of a turnaround team that got brought in. High cost operators, no focus, no strategy, no idea where they're going. And we really put a team together that changed everything. I came in and ran procurement. And so I was buying over 400,000 tons of tuna at age 29. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But I had a good team. I had a good group of people. And what I tried to do is bring some focus and some strategy and some clarity where we're going. Again, with that, we used to have a lot of loans out to boat owners that were fishing for us. Well, guess what? None of them were paying us. So we went and foreclosed on all the loans and says, we'll manage the boats. And so it gave us a real competitive advantage from a cost standpoint. Over time, I took over global operations and really revamped the cost structure, built factories in Ecuador, Ghana, Seychelles, did a couple of acquisitions of brands like John West and Petit Navire in Europe, and really created Starkist as a global company with leading market positions in all the major markets, and clearly drove profitability from a loss to over $120 million of net income by the year that I left in '99. In fact, it got to the point where in the US, we couldn't teach our two Asian competitors how to make money. And we knew all about their competitive situation. We knew all about their bank covenants. And so finally, we decided to put them out of their misery. And we basically drove Bumblebee and Chicken on the Sea into bankruptcy within 1 month of one another. Basically by turning on the spigot, driving volume, dropping our pricing, and basically turning the pressure on to where they could no longer meet their obligations. So that was kind of the Starkist experience. And that led to the next one. Hey, why not join Bumblebee? So again, a private equity firm at that point had taken Bumblebee out of bankruptcy. It was a group called Hicks Muse. Some of you may know the name. Tom Hicks owns the Texas Rangers. And again, they had already put some money into a company called International Home Foods, which itself was a private equity spin-off. And they acquired Bumblebee out of bankruptcy. I joined the firm in '99, and we had done a number of transactions at that time. They had actually done 3 acquisitions. And like a lot of private equity guys, they just figure anything that's seafood, you just buy it and it fits. Well, it's never quite that easy. And so I kind of inherited a structure in '99 where most of the employees that were left were guys that couldn't find a job elsewhere. This company had been in bankruptcy since late '97. So the biggest challenge was really building a team. And I'll talk about success factors in a couple slides. But I think the biggest single challenge that a manager has in trying to run a business is basically putting together a management team that works. It's all about people. I can tell you that if you give me a bad company with good people, we'll figure out how to make money. And conversely, if you give me a good company with bad people, it'll fail. So it really is all about people and people that you work with. The time with Bumblebee has been really exciting. Again, I joined in '99. In 2000, we spun into Conagra. Everybody made a lot of money. And at that point, the question was, do we stay? And I mentioned that Bumblebee had been acquired by a group called International Home Foods. That company had a lot of synergies with Conagra. We didn't. We were kind of sitting out there in right field. We're down in San Diego. Life is good. Conagra was in Omaha. We surely didn't want to go there. And it got to a point where we were clearly an evil stepchild for the company. And I got to go back to Omaha and have a talk with the CEO and convince him to sell us. And at that point, we worked with a private equity firm that we had selected out in New York, and were able to buy the business. We were able to steal the business, meaning that Conagra didn't think we were worth anything. So back in 2003, we acquired this company for 4.25 times EBITDA. 11 months later, we spun it public. And again, the public story was also interesting in that we were initially private, and if you looked at our portfolio at Bumblebee that time, we were a seafood company. We were number 1 in tuna, we were number 1 in salmon, but there was a third big part of the portfolio called sardines that we didn't do. So there was this little company up in Canada called Connors Brothers, and we figured we'll go buy them. Well, as it turned out, Connors was already publicly traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange at a 7-8 times multiple. So we crafted, over drinks one night late in Las Vegas, a strategy to do a reverse merger. So we actually had Connors acquire Bumblebee, with Bumblebee taking control of Connors. It gave our private equity guys the ability to spin out with a 667% internal rate of return on their investment. And we now were sitting running a bigger company. Now, we were all of a sudden publicly traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And I won't go into the details, but we were a special kind of a company called an income trust that only existed in Canada, whereby we didn't pay any tax on our Canadian income, but at the same time, we paid huge dividends out to our shareholders in Canada. And that worked pretty well for a while. But all of a sudden, the Canadian tax authorities in 2007 decided on a whim to change the tax structure of the income trusts. And lo and behold, the valuation of the income trust market dropped 40% in a week. And so, it was still a company that was making money. Our strategy was still driving us forward, but all of a sudden it wasn't nearly as lucrative. So we decided to take it private again. And working with the same private equity firm, we bought it back in November of 2008. Now, I don't know how many of you knew what the financial market was like in November of 2008, but I'd bet you not one of you can tell me another deal that got done during that time frame. So it was an amazing process. I have no friends left in the banking industry after that, meaning all the commitments and promises were made within the next day would be, well, we need some more fees. Well, we need a higher interest rate. We closed a deal with almost 4 times leverage. And unfortunately, a big chunk of our interest was at 16.25%. But it was still a good deal. We bought the business right. In fact, and we did go private. In fact, just last month in December, we now refinanced all that debt with high yield bonds at 8% to take all that back out. But we're back being a private company today. We're the only American company in the industry. And again, our management team holds a significant stake. We all had shares when we went private the first time. We all made a little bit of money when we went public. We all re-upped again to basically put money back into the transaction going forward. The keys to our success, like I said, it's been team. Not one person in that company was there when I started, and hiring is never easy. One of the other pieces of advice I'll give you, when you get into the mode when you're hiring workers, understand that hiring is a 50-50 proposition. I don't care how good you think you are. That person may look good on an interview, and they may look good on a resume, and they may be perfectly competent individuals. But they may not fit your style. They may not fit the culture of your company. And I'll tell you, you'll know that within 3 months, at which point, if it's not the right person, cut bait and move on. The worst failure a manager can make is holding on to people that can't contribute. We grew our revenues during this period from 450 to 950 million. We grew our share from 18% to 32%. You know at whose expense? Starkist, of course, we now have to refer to them as the dark side. And we established our position as a low-cost operator. My background is operations. I think you'll see one of the other tenets I talk about later is cost, and being a low-cost operator in whatever industry you're in is absolutely critical. We've expanded our presence in the Indian Ocean and Mauritius, in the Atlantic Ocean and Trinidad, and the Pacific Ocean and Fiji. And we've grown our EBITDA from 17 million the year I started to 116 million. And I always say it shows that even low tech can be lucrative. I've always had some simple philosophies regarding work that I think have served me pretty well. One, work's going to take up most of your life, so you might as well enjoy what you do. Second, part of every job entails a lot of crap. So you know what? Don't complain about it. Just do it. Third, hard work is recognized and it does pay. And finally, whatever you do, be the best at it. I can tell you, I never expected to be in the tuna industry. Okay? I don't consider myself a tuna guy. Yet everybody in the industry thinks I'm a tuna guy. I just consider myself a manager. I got to tell you, whatever business I got into, and I think part of this I learned in consulting, is you got to learn the business and you want to be the best person in whatever business you're doing than you can be. I think in terms of how I run the business, I think there's a number of factors. One is always have a plan. Kind of know where you're going. I think there's the ultimate vision of where you want to be. There's the long-term, the 3 to 5 year strategy, and then there's the tactics. What are you going to do right now to get there? And that all being said, you've got to be very flexible, because whatever you think is going to happen isn't going to happen. So you've got to be able to adapt your thought process and your planning process to what really happens. I've talked about people, and the key there, do not accept mediocrity. Know your competition well. I am a firm believer in competitive intelligence. I pay a lot of money to get it. I don't do anything illegal. You don't need to do a lot of things illegal. In my business, hey, my competitors buy equipment from the same guys I do. They buy ingredients and raw materials. Those suppliers will tell me anything I want to know to have a shot of getting my business. And you've got to know, what do they have? What are their advantages? What are they good at? Where are they weak at? Where are they vulnerable? Know your numbers. Know them even better. It's absolutely critical that you understand accounting and finance and what key levers are that drive your business. Continually challenge your organization to be better, and do not accept complacency or stagnation. Be responsive, but at the same time make quick decisions. Always push the envelope and always demand more. I think the worst thing you can ever do is say, man, we're doing really good. Well, you know what? Really good today ain't really good tomorrow, and your competitors aren't standing still. Always push for more. And again, always be the low-cost operator. I think one of the things you'll find in our organization at Bumblebee, you won't find a leaner G&A structure anywhere in the food industry. And because of that, we can move very quickly, we can move very aggressively, and we're always 2 or 3 steps ahead of our competition. But this talk isn't about me, it's about you. Your class is going to be coming out of school amongst the most serious economic crisis your parents have ever experienced. Again, some of you, I don't see enough people old enough to find humor in the joke on the left, but anybody that grew up, I was hoping there'd be some older professors here that could relate to their reports of bad acid versus reports of bad assets. And again, some of the charts that really, you guys are just coming into this, but for your parents, man, they've seen a huge amount of their savings just go away, literally in a very short period of time. Some of it's coming back, but reality is really setting in. The official start of the crisis, we all know it. September 15, 2008, there was a meltdown. Following that, for the first year after that, man, every chart we looked at was just going down. It was just ugly. The stock market during that short period of time lost more than 50%, from 13,600 down to 6,561. I mean, the world was ending. Now, fortunately, the market's recovered, but let's be clear. The market is still down 25 to 30% from its high point. And a lot of people made a real big mistake at that point in time, is when the market went down, they pulled out. So a lot of the folks in their 401k plans and their retirement plans haven't even gotten that upswing that's out there right now. Consumer confidence reached record lows. I mean, you can say things were bad in 2003, when we had the war coming in, or things were bad when Katrina hit, or when fuel prices went up. But my God, when September 2008 came around, basically consumer confidence hit the bottom. And I read things now, consumer confidence up for the 3rd month in a row. Well, there it is. It's on this chart. It's up, but it's still a long way from where it's historically been. And again, in my business, consumer spending has really changed. And if you look at Macy's, Nordstrom's, JCPenney's, I mean, the consumer gets it. They understand that, holy cow, things have changed. I can't afford to keep buying anymore. And we'll talk credit in a minute. My credit cards are maxed out. And you're seeing growth in value and convenience. My business, I love recession. Why? People aren't eating in restaurants. They're buying in the grocery store, and they're moving downscale. All of a sudden, a tuna salad sandwich sounds pretty good. Or tuna casserole, where you can feed a family for $3 ain't so bad. The ensuing credit crunch has caused severe consternation amongst a U.S. society that's become a culture of debt. If you go back, by the end of 2007, the U.S. had negative savings. And again, if you looked at what household debt was relative to income, the average household in the U.S. had 1.4 times as much debt as they had income. Unparalleled in history. And the credit crunch remains perilous. As we look at the outlook right now, consumer debt, they're still expecting losses in the 7% range. I mean, huge losses. So for the banks to say they're out of trouble, they're not out of trouble. To explain some of the tight credit limits that are going on, part of it is based on the fact that the banks know there's more pain to come. National employment, we're over 10%. This is affecting you guys. I would say jobs that you're going to be looking for are down even more than this because people aren't hiring. And when they are, trust me, there's a lot of kids that are 2, 3, 4 years older than you that are willing to take that same entry-level job that you're looking for at the same pay because they have no other option. And I think one of the things, I'm not going to talk a lot about global, but one thing to put in perspective, as bad as it is in the U.S., globally, over 60 million people are expected to lose their jobs in 2010. Not 9, 10. And more than 200 million people are at risk at falling into a ranks of people that survive on less than $2 a day. This is kind of a neat chart because it shows in brown where there's room for social unrest. U.S., we're pretty good. I mean, we're not going to have that. But when you're looking at Africa, when you're looking at Russia, when you're looking even at China, I mean, there's going to be some severe potential social issues coming up because of the impact of the economy. U.S. GDP declined in 2009 for the first time in a long time, at the same time when the U.S. government racked up massive debt. How many of you listened to Obama last night? I got to tell you what, that man can speak. That was a very powerful presentation. I thought the body language was very interesting when you saw kind of the Democrats on the left and the Republicans on the right, and every 5 minutes the Democrats would get up, and half that time, the Republicans were sitting like this. They're both at fault. And I got to tell you, they don't get it. I mean, our government right now is just living a pipe dream right now with no solution. This last year, we added over $1 trillion of debt to our economy. That's never happened before. It's, again, a lot of reasons, a lot of excuses for it. But what this trend shows you that in every year over the last decade, our national debt has increased. Again, what we're looking at here is that the projections right now is that as we move into 2010, total debt is projected to hit $15 trillion. I mean, trillion. God, when I went to college, we were barely talking a billion. And I mean, we're just talking trillions at a time now. It's unbelievable. And as debt approaches GDP, more than 100% of GDP, we're not going to be able to pay for our future. If you look at who's holding our debt, China is now our biggest debt holder, followed by Japan. How long are they going to put up with it? At some point, they stop funding our economy. I think a very interesting chart, and again, this one is a little bit alarmist based on the people that put it out, but it's not that far from the truth. What this chart basically shows is that the green, light blue, and red charts, red bars, are payments we have to make. Green is Social Security, blue is Medicare, light blue, dark blue is Medicaid. We have to make those payments every year. That dotted line going across is tax revenue. Now, if you look at the red bar, that's interest. This will tell you that with our current economic projections, by the time we get out to about 2030, we're not even going to be able to cover our interest payments. Okay? It's an ugly situation, which means at this point, we're not paying for defense. We're not paying for anything other than medical care and interest. So we have a spending problem that is way out of control. And unfortunately, the way I look at our administration right now, there's only one solution. The super taxpayer. I don't like it, but you guys aren't going to like it either. So it's clearly a very challenging environment. And as I say, wow, isn't that uplifting? What do we have to look forward to? But again, I want to put that in perspective because it's reality. And, it's, I'm not necessarily a fan of Obama, but I'm definitely not blaming the Democrats. If you look at the Republicans, they caused more of this problem over the last 2 terms than the prior Democratic administration did. But if we don't get our arms around spending, we're not going to get the economy fixed. And I got to tell you, the point in time will come. What happens when these foreign countries say, we're not supporting the dollar anymore? Wonder when they start going to a basket of currencies and we decide to say, hey, let's take the yuan, the euro, and the dollar and start pricing oil that way. When we can't print money to buy ourselves out of a problem. I mean, these governments understand what we're going to do. You know how we're going to pay for that interest? Hey, we're just going to buy a few more printing presses and just keep printing this stuff off, which means our currency is going to devalue. And all the loans they gave us are going to be worth less. They figured that out. They're not dumb. So it's a real risk that our economy and your generation is going to have to deal with. Now let me try to talk a little bit more positive on a couple of things that I think you can look forward to in the near term. really there's going to be a number of transformative shifts, in my world, what I call the consumer. And I think you can really use these rules in looking at any type of consumer. Clearly changing consumption patterns. I personally believe that the structural displacement in spending is permanent, meaning people are now value shoppers. I got to tell you, and I look at our numbers, when we used to put coupons out, redemption rate on a coupon is 0.005%. They're up 3 times that. Still low. But all of a sudden, mom is going to the grocery store with coupons. Mom is going to the store with a list. She's not going and walking the aisles and saying, I'll have a little of this, I'll have a little of that. Right now, it's basically a plan that she's going with, which makes it really tough for companies. Meaning that if you want to kind of get a display out there and hope that mom will buy your product because she sees it, historically that worked. Today, if you're not on mom's list, if you're not providing a value for her money, your product's not going to be purchased. Aging baby boomers, huge. Senior citizens are going to become a formidable special interest group. Over the next 20 or 30 years, 45% of the U.S. population is going to be over 45 years of age. Over the next 25 years, the white population will drop from 69 to 50%, and the Hispanic population will grow from 13 to 25% of the population. Huge trends that affect buying behavior, that affect products and how we put them out there. But again, a lot of changes. And the other thing we're seeing is a lot more power to the consumer. With the advent of the internet, people have heightened expectations. They can do their own research. They don't have to believe a salesperson. And more importantly, if a service or a product you're providing is bad news about that product is going to be blogged and Twittered about in record time, reaching not only a national but a global audience. Current initiatives will become norms. In our business, when you think of health and safety, environmental sustainability, and convenience, they're no longer going to be, attributes that add value. They're going to be attributes that are absolutely expected. Today, we talk a little bit, and I'm not going to talk about it in the presentation. Sustainability is an area where our company is way ahead on. It's not really a consumer issue. Only 2% of consumers are buying based on sustainability. And even though I could ask all of you, how many of you would buy more for a sustainable product? I know you'll all raise your hand. I'll prove 95% of you wrong by watching how you buy in the store, because you're going to buy what's cheapest. That's the reality today, but it's changing. Going forward, sustainable products that are convenient and harvested or provided in an environmentally safe way are going to be absolute requirements to be in the market. Real estate downsizing and reurbanization. The urban sprawl is probably going to end. People are moving back to inner cities. A lot of implications for the construction industry, for the food industry, for a number of different industries. Continued concentration of power. You're going to see continued consolidation in all kinds of sectors, right? An unprecedented consolidation in the banking sector last year. It's not over. When we look at it, I deal with Walmart. Holy crap. 20 years ago, we had a whole bunch of different customers. If one guy didn't like my price, I'd go to the next guy. Well, today, if Walmart doesn't like your price, you've just lost 30% of your business. So again, power is shifting across the board. And if you look at the government, we're seeing a lot more expansion of federal activism, a lot more cross-sector reforms. We're seeing a lot of additional costs being driven right now by the Obama administration in the areas of labor, taxation. Again, challenges that are going to make it very difficult to maintain business and jobs in the United States. I think the other thing we look at is really a private sector credibility gap. I deal with the environmental community all the time, and I got to tell you, put it this way. Today, all of you probably think Greenpeace is a great organization. You love them, and they're all about the environment. Well, I got to tell you, they're the communists. They are the wacko leftists. To deal with those guys, don't make those guys tell the truth, and don't dare confuse them with science. But by definition, they tell the truth. Now, Greenpeace can lie there as much as they want. What am I going to do? Sue Greenpeace? Now, imagine I lie about something. Front page of the newspaper. So, we're really dealing in an environment today where everybody believes the environmentalists are the good guys. In the industry, by definition, we lie, and, we're the bad guys. At least that's what Obama told us last night. Fortunately, I'm not one of those bad, evil CEO bankers. And again, I think you're also going to find corporate governance, things that you've heard about a lot over the last few years will continue to be an increasing requirement. And then globally, we talked a little bit in my presentation, what I call a devaluation of the American economic model, elevation of emerging countries, China in particular, and I think a term you guys probably talk about in class, the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China. Man, it's going to happen there. Those economies will explode over the next 20 years. And the threat of competing global currencies versus the dollar. Paying for our sins, we've talked a lot about the debt. Boy, it is really scary. And then finally, resource wars. One of the things that people don't talk a lot about, but as the global economies grow, different countries are going to rush to shore up their natural resources, e.g. iron ore and oil. And again, you're already seeing quiet battles between the US, Europe, and China in the Middle East because China doesn't have near enough raw materials like oil to drive their economy. So they're now doing what the US did years ago in terms of walking into a lot of those countries and providing huge levels of economic support in return for commitments to provide oil and resources. And a declining talent pool, again, as we look at, and I wouldn't necessarily say a declining talent pool, but a more competitive talent pool. And I'll give you a good example. We implemented SAP as an IT platform a couple years ago. Guess where I'm doing 80% of my IT work? India. Why? Extremely well-educated people, incredible work ethic, and those people can't find jobs. So, you're really looking at, what I think is going to be a whole change in the U.S. lifestyle and probably a declining standard of living for most Americans as we have to start living in a real world against companies that have significantly greater advantages than we do. So what will it take to succeed? First of all, I think the most important thing for all of you is to have a plan. Think about what it is you want out of life. Is it a lot of money? Is it a big house? Is it to feel good about what you're providing? There's different goals and objectives, but you should have one because that'll start to help you as you make your own decisions. Clearly, solid education from a good university. You guys are already there. USC has a phenomenal reputation, and I got to tell you, that buys you an interview. Okay, if 10 resumes come across my desk, and nothing against University of Riverside, but if I got UC Riverside and USC, and I have a limited amount of time, unless there's something really special on that UC Riverside resume, I'm going with the USC grad. Focus on expanding your global knowledge while still in school. Again, you are now all living in a global environment. And again, SC as a program really does a good job exposing all of you to this. But when you have free courses, don't take a Mickey Mouse course. Take a course in history. Take a course in languages. What 3 languages will you need to know in the future, in my opinion? English, Spanish, and Mandarin. Okay? Those, to me, are the 3 power languages for the future. There's no excuse for anybody in this room not to speak Spanish. You're exposed to it every single day. Mandarin, much more difficult, right? Different alphabet, different linguistics. But if you can master at least 2 out of the 3, you're ahead of most of your peers. And again, I got to tell you, as an employer, I'm looking for languages. And then try to work on the international travel and read. Again, I always recommend The Economist. Why? Because it doesn't give you a totally slanted view of the world that you get at a lot of the U.S. publications. Emphasis on hard degrees. I don't ever mean to insult somebody in marketing and communications, but I got to tell you, you got to know numbers. And even if you are a marketing or a communications grad, take all your electives in finance and accounting. You've got to know how the impact of decisions that you make are going to affect the performance of whatever company you work with. Good experience. Don't take your summers off and go surfing all summer. Work, even if it means no money. Again, when you're building a resume at this age, what you've done is important. Good work, athletics, volunteer, social programs. Again, every time you look at what you're going to do for the summer, think about building your resume. Okay, doing volunteer work in a responsible role may look a hell of a lot better on that resume than working as a busboy somewhere in Vegas where you're making $1,000 a week. Okay, it's not about the money at this age, it's about the resume. Networking. Probably the biggest single benefit you're going to get from your experience at USC is the networking you develop with other students in your classes. Hold on to those. Because I would wager to say that almost everybody in this class will be successful. And you'll all go different directions. And over time, you'll find that the business world is actually a pretty small world, and you'll run into each other somewhere else. And I think one of the things USC has, especially in Southern California, is a phenomenal alumni network. And I got to tell you, there's a lot of money in that alumni network, and that can pay a lot of dividends to all of you coming out. Realism. Be realistic in your own capabilities and the jobs and salaries that are available. I kind of make a good example. I have a nephew that graduated in finance from Hofstra last year. Good kid, C+ student, wants to be in private equity. Gotta tell you, man, a lot of competition for a real small number of jobs. Is he being realistic? Well, 8 months into it, hasn't even had a bite yet. So again, I'm not trying to put people down, but know what your capabilities are. Be realistic, both in terms of the job and the salary. Be tenacious. You are gonna be turned down a lot. Don't stop, don't get down on it, keep going. Be willing to relocate. Probably one of my biggest challenges hiring young kids like you is, man, you guys a lot of times feel entitled. No. You wanna live here. You really don't want to travel a lot because you know that affects your social lifestyle. You're not willing to sacrifice. I got to tell you, those of you that are willing to sacrifice to move to maybe some really crappy places, okay, for a couple of years, you can make good out of any place, in my opinion, if you have the right attitude. But again, coming out of school right now, you got to get a job somewhere. Right now, you'd be better off taking a really good job in a crappy location than a crappy job in a good location. A little different than what I did 25 years ago, different world today. And then be willing to sacrifice in the short term to build a career. So, my conclusion in today's environment, almost any job is a good job, and it's a start. Look, I started as a cost accountant for 7 bottling companies. My job included once a month going into warehouses and counting cases of 7-Up. I've come a long way. Okay, so I didn't necessarily start where I wanted to, but I worked hard, I made sacrifices, I've lived all over the place, and you kind of get to where you want to go. So that's kind of my presentation. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I wish you all the best of luck. And again, I'm happy to open it up at this point to any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
You said you made a lot of sacrifices. Was there any substantial ones where you were like, should I choose it, should I not choose it? Is there anyone, an example you can tell us?
Well, absolutely. It was, here's a good example. When I joined Starkist as part of a turnaround team, I'm living in Manhattan Beach, I'm living the dream, I'm living right on the beach, and here we were as an organization not making any money. And so one of our decisions as an executive committee was to consolidate the business with another division of Heinz in Newport, Kentucky. I moved now Newport, Kentucky is right on the river to Cincinnati, so I moved from a beach house to a home in the suburbs in Cincinnati. That was a really tough personal choice. Those were like the worst 3 years of my life, lived in Cincinnati. Professionally, 3 of the best. But I'm sorry, when I would go home and see guys riding lawnmowers to cut their lawn, I told my wife, if you ever see me on one of those riding mowers, shoot me. Right? That's not my dream. But it's a sacrifice you make. That one was from a personal lifestyle for me, that was a big change. Other ones weren't as difficult because when I was young, I lived in a hotel in Germany for 11 months. I commuted up when I was a consultant to Sacramento for 13 months every week. In fact, I worked for GM for 5 months between October and February, taking the red eye out every Sunday night and getting home Friday night at 9. I had no life. But professionally, it was the right way to go. And it's gotten me to a point now, I still travel a lot. I still believe that you got to have hands-on. But obviously, I can manage my life a lot better now than I did then. Yes, sir.
Does Bumble have operations in American Samoa, and how is American Samoa changing? I read something recently, and I don't remember exactly what I read.
Yeah.
Can you
No.
explain?
Yeah, that's Starkist and Chicken of the Sea were in American Samoa. Chicken of the Sea is owned by a company called Thai Union. And Thai Union basically is the largest processor in Thailand. There's a long story. We have a manufacturing matrix that's very different than Star and Chicken. And basically, Chicken of the Sea has shut down their Samoa facility to try to emulate what Bumblebee does. They've set up a new factory in Georgia. Starkist is now, you got to love these guys. So they now are the last guys in Samoa, and they're uncompetitive. So they've decided to have the congressman from American Samoa put a bill in front of the House to give them a $40 million annual subsidy directly to Starkist to help make them competitive because their costs aren't competitive. And I'm like, this still is the U.S., I think, right? So I'd like to think, and obviously I'm fighting that in Washington. So it's a tough situation. The Samoans have duty-free status of their product in the U.S. They're not required to pay U.S. minimum wage. And over the last 3 years, their minimum wage has grown from $3.50 to about $5 an hour. Personally, obviously I used to run the Samoa facility when I was a Starkist, and it was a low-cost facility. I personally think there's management issues, but they're now threatening. And when you look at American Samoa, 75% of their labor, their private sector labor, is directly or indirectly related to the tuna industry. But I got to tell you, I know the congressman from Samoa said, guys, you've been threatened that these companies are leaving for 20 years. You've done nothing to develop your economy. So now the U.S. government's supposed to bail out Starkist so that you can stay here in business. Sorry. We're willing to support funding for education in Samoa, for development of new industry, call centers, whatever you want to do, but we can't support funding going to a particular company. And so they may very well lose the entire industry over that. Starkist, again, is now owned by a Korean company. So again, many different motivations, no concern about U.S. jobs anymore. Just so you know, Bumblebee is the only American company, and we operate all of our tuna canneries on the U.S. soil. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any big plans to get Bumblebee tuna onto more shopping lists in the future?
Yeah, I think we've grown steadily. Like I said, we were about an 18 share 10 years ago. We're up to 32, and we live in a very competitive environment. Starkist in tuna is still number one. We're a strong number two, but we're number one in everything else, meaning that Starkist only does tuna, where we're in salmon, we're in sardines with Brunswick and Beechcliff and King Oscar. We're in clams with the Snow. So, we cover the whole spectrum, and we're inching in on them. I think one of our strategies, we've historically been happy being the number two brand of tuna, as long as we were number one overall and number one in the most profitable segment, which is called albacore or white meat. And yet we've kind of stepped back and realized that we think Starkist is getting more than their fair share of retailer support because they are able to tout that they're the number one brand. We're only about 1.5 points difference right now. I think it's safe to say within 2 years we'll be number one. So it's a bit of a fist fight to get there, but we'll get there. Yes, ma'am.
One of your slides said that trends would be more females in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is, and is that certain industries?
Well, I think part of it's just the reality it's going to take both man and woman to make a family be able to make ends meet. I think you've seen women coming into the workforce obviously more and more over time, and that's just a trend that's going to continue because the reality is with taxation, with cost of living, the traditional 50s, 60s models of dad working and mom staying home and taking care of the kids just isn't going to work. So, on top of which divorce rates are going up, you've got a lot more single-family households. Unfortunately, it's generally mom that's stuck having the kids, and you know what? That check she's getting from her ex ain't going to be enough for her to stay at home. So you're going to see women going into the workforce. What I'm talking now is more on the, what I call blue-collar level. White-collar level is already happening, right? If you look at colleges, there's more women in college today than there is men. So on professional jobs, that's already occurring. But you're just going to see a continued shift to two-person working households. Yes, ma'am.
I would just like to know, when you moved from Starkist to Bumblebee, were there any issues or conflicts, or was the transition to the competition received well?
No. No, it was not received well. But in fact, I didn't move one from the other. I actually, the CEO Hines at the time, still the CEO, and I had a difference, and I did a really dumb thing, and I left the company on a matter of principle. Cost me a lot of money. But it was a matter of principle. And at that point in time, the folks from Bumblebee gave me a call. And so the transition was pretty seamless, but pretty rapid. Yes?
I have a generic question for you as a mentor to a couple of these students. Students are curious, and I'm curious about your advice to them. Start out with a larger company and learn their industry that way, or start out
Yeah, it's. I've been asked the question a couple of times before, and it really is a tough answer. On the one hand, I would tell you, if it's the same job, always take the bigger company. Take the name that's going to be important on your resume. But the reality is what responsibility are they offering you as well? Meaning that if you're going to be a mail clerk at Dell, or you're going to be at a much smaller company where you're going to be a financial analyst, actually responsible for evaluating P&Ls or having some direct influence, then take that. For me, I'd say don't worry about the money. Look at the job itself. So I would always, if all else is even, take the bigger company name. But I think you also have to be very leery of what they're going to allow you to do. For instance, I've never been a fan of trying to join a company where they're going to put me in a 6-month training program. Some of them are okay. Some of them, you really don't learn much. I'd rather have somebody take me into a job and say, this is your job, this is your responsibility, make you uncomfortable, give you a certain level of responsibility you may not have had, but you can grow into. So it's just not an easy answer. So, but I would take responsibility over company name, but it's something you're going to have to be able to demonstrate, obviously, when you push that resume out for your next job. Yes, sir.
Can you talk about a little bit more about the decision-making process that you went through when you were in this role and previous roles, when you expanded business operations to, say, for example, Fiji or Seychelles?
Mm-hmm.
How did you go through that market analysis?
Well, those are kind of cost analysis. I mean, in our business, there's really 3 drivers to our cost structure: low-cost labor, direct access to fish, and having the right tariff structure on your products. And tuna happen to swim around the equator, so they're in all the oceans. When I came in, for instance, to Bumblebee, we were producing all of our product in Puerto Rico, where when I was paying full minimum wage, even for the staff that was cleaning the fish, and buying 65% of my albacore from the Atlantic Ocean, when the Atlantic Ocean only represented 35% of the fishery. Meaning I was basically paying a premium for fish and paying very high cost labor. And we had a lot of risk in terms of supply, because if something happened with the Atlantic supply, I couldn't react. So we knew we needed to diversify the supply base. So by building Trinidad, Fiji, and Mauritius, it gave us access to all 3 oceans, and we could take the volume up or down based on the supply. 2, the labor in those countries is about $1 to $2 an hour. So again, the people that are actually cleaning the fish are offshore. Cleaned fish, which is called the loin, carries no duty into the U.S., where canned tuna from a foreign country carries a 12.5% tariff rate. So we do all of our canning domestically in California and Puerto Rico, where we can maintain the safety and the quality of the product. And again, that's a very capital intensive process. And when you really look at the capital structure, we did all those 3 factories with about $1 of capital. In Fiji, we found a factory that had been owned by the government, that had it managed by third parties. We're getting stole blind. We cut a deal with the Fijian government. We just, now for the 3rd time, renewed a 5-year agreement. They've made money every year we've been in it. When the coups were happening in Fiji, we lost a whopping day. By the 2nd day, we had the gorillas cleaning the floors in the factory. Hey, we're employing workers, man. We're employing a lot of workers. And when they don't work, they don't eat. So I got to tell you, we have no financial or economic problems in these places. The gorillas in Fiji, when they try to close down the factories, trust me, they lost the support of every Fijian in that factory. So that changed in a hurry. If you take Trinidad, it was our largest supplier, a Taiwanese supplier, and we had him build us our factory. We built it with his money, but then give him a small fee as part of our conversion fee, so he gets a return. And the benefit is his required return on capital is much lower than ours. So again, everyone varied, but we knew we had to have a presence. And so we started with the ocean that was most important to us, which was the Atlantic, then moved to the Pacific, and finally the Indian Ocean. So, everyone you kind of look at, it's tough to pick a specific one. If you take the marketplace right now, for instance, we can segment our market by channel, right? You have your regular retail, you've got mass, which is Walmart, you've got drug, you've got convenience. I'm missing one. But anyway, and then we've got that broken down. We can then break that down by customer, and we can break that down by geography. So I can tell you exactly where I need to protect my business. I can tell you exactly where I need to expand my business to achieve my ultimate objectives. So, we have great data. I'm a finance guy. I still do a lot of my own analysis. And so we drive our business on numbers. So it's tough to go but you look and you've got to know the situation. And, for us, our markets are North America, but our business is extremely global. Yes, ma'am.
I think China is growing
You think right.
I mean, do you recommend us to go back China to look a job or stay here?
Well, if you're from China and you have the language skills, I think there's some phenomenal opportunities there for someone with the U.S. education. Or more importantly, you're probably going to be very valuable to American companies trying to do business there. I mean, it goes both ways. I think if you have the language capabilities to speak both Chinese and English, I got to tell you, I'd be looking for a job either here that has links there or there that has links here, because you're kind of a valuable commodity right now in that there is not a huge amount of educated Chinese that speak English well enough to do business, and clearly not very many American kids that speak Chinese well enough to do business. So I think if you have that language capability and a degree from a school like this, I think you've got a lot of opportunities. And I'd say, yeah, look at them there, look at them here as well, but take advantage of the trade that's growing between our two countries. Yes, sir.
You're saying about a social unrest in China and that kind of stuff. Do you see that as an economic bubble breaking like Soros is saying?
Yeah, I mean, that's what that article is saying. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on that at all, but I thought the chart, when you look at it, and now when you look at the wage rates in China and the standard of living in a lot of those areas still, I mean, obviously the Chinese government is pressing very hard to keep those wage rates down to maintain their level of competitiveness. And, they're all getting access to the internet and they're seeing lifestyles other places. They're going to be demanding more. And I think, trying to maintain a communist regime for people that are just very naturally capitalists, there's going to be push and shove. Yes, ma'am.
What's the status of farming tuna or canning tilapia?
In terms of farming tuna, the only farmed tuna is bluefin. That makes sense. And bluefin, we don't can. Bluefin is what you see as toro in the sashimi restaurants, $45,000 to $100,000 a fish. That makes sense. They've tried to do a little bit of farming on a species called yellowfin, which you'll see as ahi on the menu. But to tell you the truth, the wild fisheries are still very abundant. We catch about 4 million tons a year of these. And again, let's put it this way. You're able to buy light meat tuna in the store today for 59, 69 cents a can. If I got a farm, the skipjack to put in there, you're paying $3.99. So the economics don't pay on farming. Tilapia in the can, we've looked at it. It's not very appealing. It's a softer fish. And to tell you the truth, the price point, canned tuna is a really cheap food. I mean, I got to tell you, cost per ounce, we're a hell of a lot cheaper than Spam. And I compare it, says we're a perfectly good whole muscle food, and I'm competing against mechanically separated, partially defatted fatty muscle tissue, selling at a higher price per ounce than what we sell. So, trust me, buy more. I saw a question. Yes, sir.
I was wondering, what kind of struggles do you have outside of the workplace? More specifically, how do you fit family and work together? And when you start a family,
Well, I'm on my second marriage, and I'm very fortunate that I've got a wonderful wife that actually was in my industry when she was a bit younger, and we dated for about 5 years before we got married. So I think she knew what she was getting into. I travel a lot, and it's just it's probably what caused my first marriage to fail. And back then I traveled all the time. I mean, I was gone 3.5 weeks a month, which made it really, fortunately didn't have kids. And had we, I would have been a horrible parent. So I'm fortunate. I have a wonderful wife. I have a 3-year-old son. I still travel a lot, but I'm also fortunate that in my role today, I don't do all the international travel anymore. Most of mine's domestic. And obviously, I'm the CEO, so I can control my travel schedule a lot better than when the CEO is telling you to go make a trip. So it's a lot easier. But I got to tell you, for all of you, if you want to be successful in the business world, that is a tough balance. And I got to tell you, it's what will keep a lot of you from reaching what you think your aspirations are. Because trying to walk out of this education and say, I'm going to go make $50 million bucks, and I'm going to have a loving family, and I'm going to have a couple of kids, I got to tell you, it doesn't work. I would recommend, don't get married early. Make your money, build your career, get yourself to a point where you can afford to have a family. Or conversely, go into it with a partner that understands. Building a career takes a tremendous amount of effort. A lot of kids today coming out of college feel entitled. God forbid they got to come to work before 9. Can't stay after 5. Work a weekend? You're crazy. I got to tell you guys, it's out there. And it may be some of you. I don't know. But we see it all the time. It's a huge shift from when I came out of school. And those of you that are willing to come in and put in the effort and put in the time, trust me, you'll succeed. It will be rewarded. But it's a sacrifice. I will, yes?
Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, before I forget, I do want to tell one quick story that when I came to USC and went into business, I didn't know what I was going to do, what degree. And I happened to have a professor here, and I think he got kicked out of school. I think I was telling the story because I think he was a little too flirtatious. But his name was Dr. Milton Goodsward, and I'm going to give you guys a little quote. Milt used to come into all of our lectures, and he'd always have a quote for the day. And one that I never forgot, and unfortunately I never respected until now, was a quote that said, "He who marries for love and not money will have great nights, but long days." So there's your solution. I'm sorry, a couple more questions? Yes, sir.
2 questions. First off, what's your opinion on getting secondary education in terms of like an MBA or JD? And second off, how has the whole Mercury issue affected the tuna business?
Yeah. The first one's easy. I think until you've got 2 to 3 to 4 years of experience, don't touch an MBA. I got to tell you, if I get a resume on my desk from an MBA with no work experience, it goes right in the trash can. Your MBA is worth nothing if you don't bring work experience in, because in your MBA, even more so in your undergraduate degree, the classes you take are far less important than the relationships you build and what you learn from other kids that are coming from totally different industries to solve the same problem. So, 3 to 4 years of experience, minimum 2, is an absolute requirement. Methyl mercury, it's a long explanation, and I don't have that much time, but I'll put it in perspective. The advisory that our illustrious Food and Drug Administration put out that said pregnant women should eat no more than 12 ounces of tuna per week was based on a study done of women that eat whale meat and whale blubber in the Faroe Islands. How many of you have whale meat in your diet? Okay. Whale meat had not only high levels of methylmercury, but 700 times the level of polychlorinated biphenyls and POPs, persistent organic pollutants, deemed to be safe. But because FDA couldn't decide which one, or if there was a confounding, they said, let's take the most conservative science and say 12 ounces. To further use that study, which is about the worst piece of science I've ever seen, would say that if you're a pregnant woman in your 3rd trimester of pregnancy and you eat 1,364 cans of tuna per year, you got a reason to be worried. I got to tell you, I'm still trying to find that consumer. There has never been a case of mercury poisoning. And this guy, Jeremy Piven, who tried to get out, because, come on, what a crock of shit that was. It's like, come on, let me take your blood test, buddy. Let's see what other drugs you've been doing. So, no, there is absolutely no, but it has affected the category. I'll still go out to I'll be out at a restaurant and talking to people, and they say, what do you do? Oh, I work with Bumble. Oh, yeah, you guys are the ones with the mercury in the tuna. Or the lead. There's a negative connotation. And it's unfortunate because all the science, a study of 11,000 women in the UK that showed that women that ate seafood during pregnancy had kids that scored demonstrably higher on IQ tests than children of women that didn't. On and on and on. But it's out there. Even FDA is coming out and trying to correct the advisory, but it's out there. And so, yeah, it's having a bit of it's tough to measure exact effect, but it's an attitudinal issue that's definitely out there. And again, I even went to a doctor a few years ago on a physical. And you go through these 2-day physicals, and at the end I get the nutritionist who tells me, okay, you're 10 pounds overweight, what do you eat? I go through, I said, eat a can of tuna every day for lunch. Oh, we're gonna have to cut back on the tuna. I said, do I look like a pregnant woman? And so for the next 40 minutes I gave her an education. So, but it's out there. And again, it's fueled by environmentalists. Understand where the methylmercury issue came from. It came from environmental firms that were trying to force the US government to pass controls on emissions from coal-fired electricity generating plants that spew mercury into the ocean. There is no mercury being caused man-made in oceans and tuna. The minute amounts of mercury in tuna are caused naturally from ocean sediment. But again, that could be a long story. But I would tell you, no risk, but it is something we deal with. Yes, sir.
Talking about environmentalists, what kind of sustainable fishing techniques do you use at Bumblebee?
You know, it's not sustainable fishing techniques. The tuna stocks that we deal in, albacore, yellowfin, skipjack, are all managed in a sustainable manner. I mentioned there's tuna swims around the equator, and it's managed by 4 regional fishery management organizations, RFMOs, one in the Atlantic, one in the Indian, and 2 in the Pacific, Western Pacific, Eastern Pacific. Each RFMO is made up of anywhere between 14 and 19 nations, both distant water fishing nations that fish and coastal nations that control the fishing grounds. And each RFMO has an independent science body that does all the tracking studies, they do tagging studies, they do stock assessments, very, very sophisticated computer modeling. I mean, we can't look down yet with a satellite and count the fish, so it's still a lot of scientific modeling. And then they set stock assessments and they set recommendations on conservation plans. So in today's world, and again, if you're really interested, go on the Bumblebee website. Okay, Bumblebee.com has a whole section on sustainability, and more specifically on tuna, go on ISSF, International Seafood Sustainability Foundation. We've assessed the whole world. We've graded all the tuna stocks. The real issues we have going forward is that all of our stocks are or have reached maximum sustainable yield. They're not in danger. But the problem with these RFMOs is they make decisions on a consensual basis. And all you need is one guy to say, nah, I'm not going to support that conservation plan. What generally happens today is the scientific committee said, here's the conservation plan we recommend, and then all the member nations negotiate it and it becomes a watered down version. If you look what ISSF is doing, it's bringing market power to bear, where today our membership is 65% of the world's canning industry. And we're basically going to these guys and saying, hey man, we're going to increase our membership, but at the same time, if you don't put the conservation plan in place, we're not going to buy. So there's a lot of work being done, but conservation is a very complicated subject. But like I say, if you're interested, our website has some pretty neat stuff on what we're doing, not just in tuna, but salmon, sardines, clams, and some of our other fisheries. You know, one final point. Again, we always combat the environmentalists on this. I leave it to you guys to think, who loses more if fisheries are overfished? The environmentalists or companies like mine? What's my business if there's no fish? What am I going to sell? The environmentalists just go on the next money-raising cause. So we're all about sustainability because it's our future. Yes, sir.
Do you own the ships?
We do not. We have a small presence in fishing and sardines. I am personally invested in tuna fishing vessels, but not through Bumblebee. Bumblebee basically contracts and buys.
I mean, you said know your competition well. Try doing it too. Do you even figure out the competition?
When you can, you know, but it's a matter of what does taking them out mean. A good example is this. At the time when we drove Starkist, at the time when I was at Starkist, when we drove Bumblebee and Chicken on the Scene to bankruptcy, the big question is who's going to come in and take over. The brands aren't going away. You know, my biggest fear would be to attack one of my competitors, basically put them into bankruptcy, and let somebody else come in and buy them at cents on the dollar, and all of a sudden I've just created a bigger competitor. Sometimes it's good to have a competitor that's weak and keep them weak. Sometimes the cost of taking them out. So I'm not saying don't take them out. Hell, I'd love to take them out. But it's a calculated risk, and what does taking them out really mean? Do they go away permanently, or do they come back in a different shape or form? Time for one more question. Anybody new? Okay, ma'am.
Do you encourage us to pursue the Master of Accounting degree right after our graduation?
Again, I'm not as familiar with the Master of Accounting program. From the MBA program, I'd say definitely not. I can't give you good advice on that, although, you know, personally, I always feel having a bit of real experience in between, you know, the problem with school is it's great, but it ain't reality. When you go out there and actually start doing people's books and start doing audits, it's not what you learned in school. Okay, there's aspects you learned, but it's a brave new world. And I just believe an advanced degree really benefits from knowledge, real world knowledge coming into the educational program. Okay. Again, thank you very much and good luck to all of you.
We'd just like to say thank you again, Chris, for your very open and frank discussion. I know I enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. We have a small token of appreciation for you, actually, if you wouldn't mind coming up again.
It's like USC sweatshirt or something.
On behalf of the USC Marshall School of Business, we'd like to present you with this gift. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.